an idea unique to the United States that anyone can thrive in the many freedoms we receive as citizens. The 1920s were an age of striking social and political change. More people now lived in cities rather than farms and were exposed to a new lifestyle entirely through this process of urbanization. Women became more liberated in their fashion choices and etiquette. The new, energetic dances of the Jazz Age required them to move more freely, giving way to a new dress and label known as a flapper. A flapper typically described a woman who smoked, drank, danced, voted, cut her hair, wore makeup, and went to parties. Hobbies in automobiles and driving in general became a new type of entertainment, as demonstrated by Gatsby's obsession with his Rolls-Royce in the novel. By the 1920s, Henry Ford had perfected the mass production assembly line in his Model T. This technique became standard in Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, known as the Big Three, making it easier and cheaper for everyday Americans to own a vehicle. Throughout the 1920s, the use of the radio as a form of entertainment skyrocketed. The airwaves became filled with music, variety shows, and comedies. News also played an important part and acted as a mode of amusement in itself. For example, when Charles Lindbergh became the first person to fly non-stop across the Atlantic from New York to Paris in 1928, the radio brought this astonishing feat into American homes, turning him into a celebrity overnight. Furthermore, the use of advertising over the radio was introduced, along with other propaganda approaches.
Commercial activity was at an all-time high because of the industrial boom during the late 1800s. Mass production and lower prices meant more goods were available to people than before. This new competition changed the face of advertisements. Instead of just announcing a new product, they had to persuade the people they needed this product. They began hiring movie and sports stars to sell their products and taking advantage of the materialistic mindset that so many people had during this time.
During this time of rapid social development and growth as a nation, the United States experienced the introduction of sports into everyday life. Sports have always and will always dominate when there is a lull in life. During this time period, jobs became mechanized, labor unions worked for shorter hours, and eventually people found themselves with hours of free time, previously unheard of. This set the stage for the development of leisurely, professional, and collegiate sports, previously not a part of the American lifestyle. Baseball, America's favorite pastime, blew up during this time period. For the first time, we saw superstars of the sports world becoming household names. Notably, one of the most famous baseball personas to this day, George Herman Ruth, more popularly known as Babe. The Babe's ability to dominate the field of play throughout 22 seasons playing professional baseball left a lasting impression on America. His sauntering ability and identifiable image drove the country wild. Babe became a legend among men, sauntering up to the plate, lit cigar in mouth, and calling out which section of the stadium he would hit his home run into. It was personas like Babe Ruth that led to the further development of the Major League Baseball. Arguably, the most legendary of collegiate rivalries, Army versus Navy, took off during the 20s. Though the Army-Navy football game had originally taken place in 1890, it was during the 1920s that the game got national attention. The United States Military Academy Black Knights and the United States Naval Academy Midshipmen met and played each other in the most intense football game in the nation every year. It struck many Americans that, though these men would fight and claw for victory, given different circumstances they would lay down their lives for one another on the battlefield. Soldier Field was built in Chicago in honor of the 1926 Army-Navy football game played there, later becoming the home grounds of the Chicago Bears. Another social advancement seen during the 1920s was the appearance of women in sports. Though not performed on the same professional level as men at the time, women were now allowed to participate in sports. Seen as taboo by previous generations, women's sports grew in popularity, especially among other young women. This movement, tied hand in hand with the flapper aesthetic, led to the advancement of women's rights and helped women to obtain near equality.
There were many significant events in the 1920s that shaped our society today. Most significant was the Ku Klux Klan, which had been reestablished in 1915. This new chapter of the KKK was not only anti-African American, but also anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, prohibitionist, and anti-Semitic. Their stances focused on the social tensions of the time, and through this they attracted attention and gained lots of support for their beliefs. The KKK thrived throughout the early 1920s, but by 1925, after many organizations finally began speaking out against them, they lost many members and support for them dramatically declined. Another greatly debated issue of the time was prohibition. From 1920 to 1933, the sale, production, and transportation of alcohol were all banned in the United States. While possession wasn't banned under federal law, many local laws and states banned possession altogether. Supporters were led by rural Protestants and social progressives. Anti-prohibitionists argued that the ban was an intrusion of Protestant ideals on a central aspect of urban, immigrant, and Catholic life. Many laws and actions in the 1920s focused on great societal change. Women were finally able to vote, actions were taken to reduce immigration, and all Native Americans born in the United States were granted citizenship.
Business in the 1920s was booming as a result of two key changes: increased access to credit and assembly line manufacturing. With the introduction of credit, through which consumers were able to borrow money and pay back expenses over time, shoppers were able to buy expensive consumer items that were previously only affordable to the wealthy. In fact, 75% of all cars, 90% of all furniture, and 75% of all washing machines were bought on credit. Also, about $140 million worth of clothing per year was bought on credit. The second cause of booming business of the 1920s was the introduction of assembly line manufacturing. One of the most notable examples of this was the widespread sale of Henry Ford's Model T, which were being produced at a rate of 1 every 10 seconds by 1925. In fact, Henry Ford's assembly line brought the average price of a car down from $850 in 1908 to only $250 by 1925. So in conclusion, the 1920s were critical in shifting the American economy towards the consumer-oriented one that it is right now. People had more access to credit, and paired with more efficient production processes, businesses were able to wildly increase revenue and improve the economy. Today, over 71% of our economy is still heavily reliant on consumer spending, and the new types of credit and modern-day improvements to the assembly line show how we've used the foundations that American businesses created in the 1920s to lead us to modern-day successes. One of the most fiercely debated issues in the editorials of the 1920s was how much to protect our booming economy. There were few attempts to actually regulate business. Instead, taxes were cut, which encouraged people to spend more. However, on an international scale, this relaxed approach wasn't apparent. In 1922, the government imposed the Fordney-McCumber tariffs on imports, raising the average tariff to about 40%. These made foreign goods very expensive, so people bought American. And as a result, many of America's trading partners also increased their tariffs. While protecting American businesses can sound like a good idea, many progressives were against this measure, as it would hurt relations with our vital trading partners. For example, 5 years after the passage of the tariff, American trading partners had raised their own tariffs by a significant degree. France raised its tariff on automobiles from 45% to 100%. Even Henry Ford was against the tariffs, saying that the American automobile industry did not need protection, since it already dominated the domestic market, and their interest was instead expanding on foreign sales. This is an issue that's just as relevant today, with calls from many politicians to make our trading with China more fair. As we decide how to deal with potentially manipulative trading measures from some of our modern-day trading partners, we should keep in mind the effect of protectionist measures in the past.
Even after the 1920s came to an end, the idea of the American dream remains nearly the same. As demonstrated in an interview with Susan Bendall, who grew up in the 1940s and 50s, women's roles might have been altered with time, but the overarching theme for prosperity, education, and independence endure.
What were your hopes and dreams as a child?
As a child, my hopes and dreams were to be independent and productive. I wanted to have it all. The home, the white picket fence, the loving husband, and successful children. I wanted to be the nurturer from which all this sprung. I never sought to be a career woman.
Do you see yourself as having achieved the American dream?
I see myself as having accomplished my dreams. I live comfortably. I have a loving husband who I supported during his college years. I also had the opportunity to attend college myself prior to the birth of my 2 daughters. I feel I successfully reared them, instilling in them my confidence and ensuring that they took advantage of all opportunities growing up. They are now both independent, productive women, as I had dreamt they would be.
I'm tripping off the power.